Whoa, Fig Fam! How is it going? Let's get into it right away. We have some propagation to do, and I want to show you today what I do to propagate fig trees in my greenhouse to make more fig trees. Quick shout out to Terry and his wife. Thank you so much for the mug. Grateful. Just spreading the love in my coffee. Because you know, figs and coffee. So I've done a bunch of reorganizing. It's been so cold here. I have not had a chance to propagate. I've reinforced the greenhouse, and the greenhouse has done so well. I am no longer worried about anything growing in my greenhouse for the temperatures of Wilmington, North Carolina, zone 8B. And now we have more cold weather ahead of us. But guys, I'm delayed. I'm delayed in fig propagation, and I need to get into it. With that being said, I have a really efficient method of propagating fig trees, letting them grow into trees where you can subsequently up-pot them into larger pots or into the ground. So let me show you my soil combination and my watering and where I put them for sunlight and growth. Let's go. Into the greenhouse with my citrus and plumeria. All right, Fig Fam. So despite it being 40 something and rainy out, here in the greenhouse it's 67. So I can take my jacket off. But let's get into some cuttings, because I really want to show you. I've had my cuttings in storage in my fridge for anywhere from a few days to almost a few months at this point. Mid-January is now upon us. We have cold weather on the way, but I want to get this rooting video out to you guys so I can show you how I root my cuttings, and I'll do extra measures to protect them in my greenhouse using space heaters, heat mats, any other heating methods. But I really want to show you an efficient way to root your fig cuttings that is simple and effective. Those are the two things we want. Background on fig cuttings is that they can take anywhere from a few weeks to start to root to a few months. Generally, it takes 2 to 3 months for them to become rooted cuttings that you could consider a fig plant. I operate at about a 70% success rate. So 70% of the cuttings that I root make it. I'd like to say 100, but I experiment a lot. I push the limits of my cuttings, and I'm doing a huge number of cuttings in my greenhouse. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of cuttings. So if I was only doing 20, I'd have a lot more time to spend on those fig cuttings. The varieties depend on your success rate too. So your Col de Dames, your I-258s, your fancier, actually tastier varieties in some cases tend to be a little more difficult to root. I have less than ideal conditions to root in sometimes. I generally root in my greenhouse here outside because I have a lot of family stuff in my personal home. So your conditions depend on your success rate as well, right? But what I look for is I try to keep 70 degrees plus where I'm rooting my cuttings. If it falls below, at least some of the days or sometimes, I will be okay with that if they're on heat mats. I don't have my Falcos with me, which I love, but I have these Coronas that I'm going to use today. My Falcos I left when I did an on-site visit. I do on-site consulting for people in their gardens and fig trees. So if you are in the southeastern North Carolina area, reach out to me. I could set something up. We can set up an appointment. To get started, you see these fig cuttings here? They are in a bag that has been nicely wrapped in paraffin wax on the tips and then wrapped in saran wrap. These cuttings are from when I had fig cutting orders and I didn't think that the size was big enough for those orders for all of you. So they inevitably become my fig cuttings. I still see a lot of potential and viability in them, and that is great because I think we can still root them. And that's me just relying on my years of experience. You can see that I'm going to unwrap the saran wrap off of them. And underneath, you can see a beautiful fig cutting. It's a terminal bud, which is my favorite. For rooting, it doesn't have to be. It has a cutting tip on the bottom where I wrapped in paraffin wax, and that keeps the moisture in and protects it as well when I'm storing it. But what you can do is we can take this off, and I have a wonderful cutting right here. Now, I'm going to take these clippers, and I am going to clip. You can see every node here has these little lenticles. And those lenticels have the ability for roots to come out. So what I can also do is I can cut right below those lenticels, as you can see here. And this green layer, which is called your cambium layer, can produce roots as well, has rooting hormones in that layer. And so what I did, a little bit of scoring, which is where scoring is the method of just scraping the new growth wood like that. And it allows for exposure to roots. You can do a big cut if you want. I don't recommend it because these are injuries and exposures to the plant, which you can expose to pathogens. So you can do that. If you find your cuttings have been stored for a while, they could be on the drier side. What you can actually do is you can soak them in some water. This is from my RO water system in my house. So I trust the cleanliness of this water. I'm giving that cutting a soak. That is a Peter's honey cutting. And I should actually have a few more of these in this bag. I do. And see, these aren't terminal. In fact, they have a top and a bottom cutting. And what I do is that's kind of calloused or scarred or lost some of the vitality in it a little bit. So I just prune back to where I see the green again. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this in parafilm on top because it is a cutting that'll be exposed to the air. You can see I cut that there at the bottom. I don't necessarily need to cut them on the top. I want that healing process to happen. But again, 1 inch here of at least wood growth, but you can see those little lenticels. And you can see the node where the leaf was before, and you can see up here, this bud here has a potential for a new branch growth. But I'm going to cut right up to the base. I can do some scoring of the bark. And that's all you need to do. Let it soak in the water for a little bit. And while those are soaking, I can prep my containers. This is my rooting medium. It is 1 part coconut coir and 1 part perlite. It's very simple. You can use peat if you would like, and then you can use soil conditioner if you'd like, but try to keep things inert. And the reason that I use coconut coir, and make sure that it's well washed, otherwise it'll be salty. I've heard that it's hard to get all the salt out of it, but fig cuttings do okay in triple wash coconut coir. I'll put a link to the coconut coir that I've been using that I get on Amazon. You buy it in large bricks that you rehydrate, and then you can take that rehydrated coconut coir and you can mix it with perlite. Perlite is just popped rock that's like pumice, and it's light and also inert. And both of these are hydrophilic enough, or they like water enough to hold on to it. But once they find enough water to hold on to, they drain the rest. And that's the Goldilocks zone you want with how wet you want your soil medium for your fig cuttings. You want it to be able to be slightly wet, which you can see here, versus some of the dry stuff on top. And you want to be able to squeeze it without any water coming out. You can see it's how it's slightly clumped. It's been sitting here for a few days like this. And the water is not coming out of this. It's not sopping wet, but it is just slightly damp. And that is perfect for fig cuttings. They want to have that moisture, but they don't want to be wet because they can't actually take up any of the water yet. They're just fig cuttings. You want to encourage root development. And to encourage root development, you need airflow. So you need something light and fluffy like this. And you want some presence of moisture, and you want warmth. All of those pieces play a role in encouraging root cuttings to develop. So the warm heat, like from the heat mat, and in a warm room, then you have natural sunlight, which can invigorate the cuttings on the bark layer to push out leaf growth. But that comes secondary to pushing out roots. In fact, I always like to see that there hasn't been any leaf development or bud development on my cuttings for at least a week or two, because I want to focus on the energy going into the root system and the root development of those cuttings. So nice, porous, damp but not wet medium that's inert, so not a lot of organic matter. Organic matter can carry pathogens that the big cuttings can't defend themselves to quite yet. So coconut coir is good against preventing things like mold and bacteria from developing already, and it's a sustainable product. It comes from the fibers of a coconut. So This is the meat I'm using. Let's fill up my containers that I'm going to use for these fig cuttings. These are Stew & Sons 3x8s, and I buy them by the bulk from stewandsons.com. I'll put that link in there as well. And for now, I'm just going to fill these up. I have a lot of cuttings to do. And this is quite satisfying, I must say. All right, this looks really good, guys. And that was really easy. All right, so I have my tray filled up. We are going to put it up on the table, and I'm going to show you how I insert the fig cuttings. And there's a fun little trick to it to make sure that the rooting hormone stays in the cuttings and that you have enough depth and enough surface of the cutting exposed for your tree to feel comfortable enough to root successfully. So let's check it out. So I've let my cuttings soak for a little bit, and I'm going to take them out and I want them to dry. I have a few different types of rooting hormones that I use, and I'm not too particular because figs generally don't even need rooting hormone, but it can help hedge your success. And if you have cuttings that are on the fence about surviving or not, whether they're really small, they're really young, maybe they're not lignified that much, rooting hormone can push them over into that successful side of taking and becoming their own tree. Today I'm going to be using Clonex. I'll put the link in the description as well. I also have up here what's this Fertilome. This is a powdered application. When you do powdered applications, you can dip those in, but with Clonex, this stuff is a gel, and it'll break down to a liquid over time, the more you use it, etc., especially if you're washing your cuttings and it gets diluted. But I use a kid's toothbrush. And here's the trick. Now that I've scored the bark, the cutting's ready, it's a terminal bud, so I'm not going to apply any sort of parafilm on top. I'm going to dip the paintbrush in the rooting hormone, and I'm just going to brush it in where I had cut or scored the bark, just like that. You don't need a lot. And this stuff, if you just dip it in your Clonex, it'll be too much moisture and it'll actually rot on you. And so just be careful with that. If it's your first time you're new at it, paper towel, a napkin, your finger, because your finger's gonna be okay. It's not gonna sprout roots if you get it on your finger. Now, when I go to put it in here, I'm actually gonna use another fig cutting, like a dibbler, if any of you use that term for gardening, and I'm gonna pre-puncture the hole. And what this does is, say you're using Fertilome, Dip and Grow, say you're using Clonex, that you are not going to rub the rooting hormone off into the soil once it's all the way in the bottom. And when I dibble, I put it in about halfway down because you want a nice distance from the bottom of the cup, because there is some level of proprioception that plants have where they know they want to put out roots. And so I'm going to put this cutting about halfway down, and I'll have all this space to put out new roots, and then eventually we'll wrap around inside here. So I drop it in, and that's all I got to do. And then I push around it, and there you go. I'm going to backfill the top here. And this stuff is quite porous, so if you're using a nice porous medium like this, it doesn't need to be rock solid tight, but it can be firm. I can still push it down to a hard surface, and it's already damp. I don't need to water it anymore. That cutting is ready to go into a nice warm environment. Last but not least, to remember what's what, because if you're doing a lot of fig cuttings, you're inevitably going to lose track. This is a Peter's honey. Ta-da! And what I actually do, there's a doctor that talks about words of affirmation that go into water and transfer through water, and I kind of believe that with everything in life, and how you present yourself and what words you give to yourself to use to yourself and others. But I am going to write love on the cutting, and it goes right below the surface, and that just lets this fig cutting know, and all the water around it, that it is loved. There you go, guys. Very easy. I'm going to put a few more of these in here. Then I'm going to do the rest of my own. before I put in these cuttings, let's go ahead and wrap those up with parafilm. If you guys aren't sure about parafilm, or I use it, it's here, it's wax based, so it stretches as the plant grows, so it can push out in case the leaf bud wants to break out of the top of it. It's very easy to use for grafting as well. This is the box. I'll put a link in the description as well. I know I get to talk to you guys about this, but this is a very meditative process for me. I really enjoy rooting fig cuttings. I don't get as much time to do it as a parent, but it's something that I can do in the dark, or I could do little bits of it at a time and come back to it later, as long as I have my setup here that's undisturbed. So what I did is I wrapped the top of that cutting in parafilm. What's great about these is if they do root, turn into trees, this breaks down in UV light. So you can just leave it on and it'll eventually break down. It usually turns black and it falls off on its own. So again, I've cut to the base. I got my kid's paintbrush. I'm going to dip in the Clonex and I'm just going to brush it on. Just like that. Easy peasy. Just at the base and any score marks that I did. And there's just like the slightest hue of purple on there. This Clonex is purple. And that's ready to go. So take my volunteer dibbler cutting, push it about halfway down. You don't have to overwrap it, just enough to get solid cover from the outside air. Again, you don't want to score too much, right? Because you don't want to have too much space open. And you can see here I have half the cutting below and I have half the cutting above. So I have enough nodes below for root development and I have enough nodes above for leaf development, or the potential of. A lot of times they'll have one potential leader out of all of these nodes that'll keep growing. And that's all you need, especially in their first year. All right, so I got 4 done. And I'm going to finish this tray and then I'm going to show you how I put them on their grow rack and what I use to encourage them to grow. All right, so now it's going on to my growing trays. And these are all my shelves of fig cuttings. This whole row here is going to be filled with cuttings. This whole row will mostly be filled with cuttings. Hopefully I'll have rooted trees that can go up on the top shelves. But what's important here is that this area gets the most amount of sunlight and the most amount of heat in my greenhouse. And I'm on a heat mat. So it's 70 degrees in here. And then I have a heat mat to really encourage root development. And this seedling heat mat I will put on the description as well for what I use. And it comes with here its own thermometer that I set to 78 degrees Fahrenheit. That seems to be my Goldilocks zone. You really want anything over 75 just because you want that warmth. You can go all the way up to 85 plus because when the greenhouse cools down, or if you're in a cooler place at night, you still want that warmth in the roots because that's going to encourage root development. Up top here, what's really going to encourage leaf development is going to be sunlight and humidity, and of course heat as well. So keep that in mind, but what I'm trying to first and foremost do is encourage root development, because if it has roots, then it can feed the leaves. If it has leaves, it cannot feed the roots. And so generally, if you don't see any sort of development on top for a week or so, that's actually pretty good news. If the cutting looks healthy, it doesn't look over wet. And what I do this is after a few weeks, I kind of give it a tug. It's very soft and wiggly now. And if you have roots, you will feel the firmness of it being planted in here. Just letting you guys know. It's true, it's there, it happens. And check in on it from time to time. If the top dries off, check this out. So if the top up here gets dry, that's okay. If you start to notice down here, or if you look underneath, and this is dry, that's when you can add a little bit of moisture. But really, I am just misting these with a mister and letting nature do its thing. So I will mist the greenhouse and the inside often on warm days, and it'll keep that humidity up in here, which encourages more growth after I've seen some root development, but keeping it warm, ready in that Goldilocks zone around 78 degrees for the soil and for the air. If it gets cold at night, don't let it get below 55. Fig fam, thank you so much for joining me. I really want this to be helpful for you, so let me know if you have any questions or comments. If you really enjoy this, please like, please subscribe. Let's grow together, all right? Take care, Fig fam.